a man who plays a monkey in the most natural manner possible, was just one of the reviews Black American actor Ira Aldridge received in Britain. Throughout his career, he was lambasted, mostly for his audacity in daring to be an actor at all. The reviewer for the Times stated that he was unlucky for the stage, and the shape of his lips made it utterly impossible for him to pronounce English in such a manner as to satisfy even the unfastidious ears of the gallery. Yet, despite the many condemnations, Aldridge went on to be a highly celebrated actor of his time period, touring across Europe, playing a wide variety of roles, including Shakespeare's Macbeth and King Lear, and even becoming one of the most highest paid actors in the world at the time. In 1828, in the age of slavery, Aldridge was invited to run the Coventry Theatre. But how? Born in 1807 and raised in New York City, Aldridge faced many difficulties working as an actor in America. For one, slavery was still legal and prevalent in the South, and while most northern states had abolished slavery, they replaced it with a slew of discriminatory measures aimed at ensuring black subordination. As such, at age 17, Ira Aldridge left for England in 1824, never to return again, but instead to enjoy a career lasting over 40 years. Just a few months after arriving in Britain, Aldridge was cast in the role that would come to define him, Othello, at London's Royal Coburg Theatre, and became the first African-American actor to establish himself professionally in a foreign country. His debut at the Coburg Theatre in 1825 got him named as the celebrated American tragedian of color. And at the ripe age of 18, years later, he would use the name the African Rocious on playbills. Though his blackness served as a hindrance in many ways, especially in New York City, his assumed African nationality served to impress the English audiences, since his acting was so polished and the average English attitude saw African synonymous with barbarian. Aldridge's extraordinary talent went beyond the stage. His Shakespearean track record caused European audiences to speculate whether Africans were truly inferior to Europeans after all. Abolitionists clung to Aldridge as an example to their cause, showcasing that a Negro man capable of understanding and interpreting Shakespeare proved for clear intellect that could be applied to the entire race. Ira Aldridge then served as a cultural phenomenon in the 1820s beyond just his incredible stage presence. Throughout his career, Aldridge redefined black roles and the type of actors who could play them, often transforming black characters from villains into heroes through his performances. From Shakespeare's time up until the early 19th century, Othello had traditionally been played by white actors in blackface, until Aldridge. And while his provincial performances as Othello were generally acclaimed, it was not until almost the end of his career and after a long and bitter struggle that he received, on the London stage, anything like acceptance in the role. This was due to London audiences having Shakespearean actors in abundance, including Othello. Despite Aldridge playing him as a black man, Aldridge's American accent and modification of lines proved as sacrilegious to London audiences. Not to mention his embrace and kiss with the leading lady left a sour taste in most Britons' mouths. His blackness was simply the cherry on top for most. Aldridge had the opposite reception across Eastern Europe, which was where most of his commemoration derived from. Performing in Russia was no problem due in part to the fact that they couldn't understand his English lines, and thus didn't hold as much importance to the audiences in London. For the next 20 years, Aldridge played exclusively in the European provinces where he built a loyal following and handsome fortune. On the road for most of the year, performing throughout the British Isles, ready for the new scenery and a new challenge, Aldridge added to his Shakespearean repertoire by playing traditionally white roles such as Richard III, Shylock, Macbeth, and Hamlet starting in 1830. In 1852, he began his first major European tour, leaving standing ovations in his stead. Despite his international celebrations, however, he still struggled with regular engagement in London and bounced between touring Europe and London because of this. Receiving a Golden Order of Service or Knighthood of Saxony in 1858 and debuting his role as King Lear in 1859, he continued to earn worldwide fame and a considerable fortune. Aldridge spent the last 6 years of his life performing primarily in Russia and France, where he was described as one of the greatest tragedians of all time. Ira Aldridge died on tour in Poland in August of 1867. Aldridge's life and work was on the front lines, fighting for blackness to be accepted on the stage and in society, and one he did almost entirely alone, at a time of very few black actors, not to mention black American actors. In a time of eugenics, Aldridge's acting managed to extend the emotional repertoire of the black character, a feat that seemed almost impossible at the time. Continuing on from Aldridge's classical entertainment repertoire is theatre director and Talawa theatre artistic director Michael Buffong, who reworks stage classics with black and global majority actors, which is better received by the modern London audiences. Aldridge's 1859 debut as King Lear is not a thing of the past, as Buffong reworked this classic nearly 160 years after Aldridge first hit the stage. Aldridge, in many ways, paved the way for today's guest and his theatre work, and his story will highlight how the industry is still changing to incorporate an inclusive and creative compass. Welcome to the How Did I Get Here podcast, brought to you by Black Cultural Archives, where we delve into the journeys behind the success stories of those in the arts and heritage sector to give you better insight into how to step into these careers. I'm your host, Binta Yade, and in this episode, we explore the entertainment industry with Michael Buffong, Artistic Director of Talawa Theatre Company. Thank you for joining us today. So to start us off, can you please give our listeners the long and short of who you are, why you're here today? Who is Michael Buffong?
Well, I am Michael Buffong. I am the Artistic Director of Talawa Theatre Company. I'm here today to talk about my journey within theatre and within the industry. I am a father, brother, son, friend, godfather, mentor. I think that might be my list for the moment, yeah.
It's a pretty long list. I think it's a good start. So you've had an incredible journey in theatre and screen more widely. Can you talk us through how you first got started, where you first started off and how you got kind of started on this journey?
I'll talk about like when I was little, like when my dad used to come home from work, he used to have this newspaper and he'd give you the newspaper. And in the newspaper, they always had a list of what movies were on TV. And I never got to see any of these movies. So I'd read a little breakdown of what it was and kind of imagine what it was like, because I never, got to see them. And then when I did get to see them, I also slightly felt, oh, God, I thought it'd be slightly different than that. I thought it'd be maybe a bit better or more exciting. So that was quite fascinated. And then later on in my life, you get to understand that these things are made.
Yeah.
You can make these things. When I was about 17 or 18, I went to a youth theatre show at Stratford Theatre Royal. And it was by Tunde Ikoli. And on stage at the time were a couple of names you probably recognize now, were Roger Griffiths and Joe Martin, who are now very successful actors. As well as, about 18 other young people doing a play called The Time for Celebration by Tunde Ikoli. Wow. It was about young people who were kind of, dealing with unemployment and parents and being young and being in love. And they sang and they danced and they looked like me, they sounded like me, and they were on stage in Stratford. And I thought, I want to do that. Yeah. That's what I want to do. I want to be up there with them lot. So that's how it started. I got invited in. And that's when you start to really realize, so you make it. You make shows and someone writes them and then you rehearse them and then you put them on stage and hopefully, people come and see it. So, that led to, a few years in youth theatre, being invited on directors courses. I started off acting to begin with. So I have a kind of first-hand insight of what actors need and actors' journeys. What they need to perform. But I really think I realized my calling was directing. That's the bit where I really thought, I can do this bit. I can do this bit really well. And then it was about kind of trying to get work. Yeah. That's the kind of the long and the short of it.
And so when you went about trying to get work, especially in the time that you were first coming up, it was, I'm assuming, a predominantly white, it's still a predominantly white industry. So there's no assumption needed there. So how did you go about kind of securing opportunities, and did you find that you were faced with obstacles that you maybe hadn't been prepared for?
I didn't think about it in that way back then. I really didn't. First of all, I was part of a cohort of directors. Obviously there was a very obvious lack of black and Asian directors when I was first starting up. Undoubtedly, Philip Headley, who was running the Stratford Theatre Royal, he got some money from the Arts Council, and there was a course run to encourage people to think about moving into directing. Philip came to me and said, I think you might like this. Quite a few people were on that course at the time who've gone on. Indu Rubisingham, who's now running the Kiln. She was part of that first cohort back then. So there's obviously a need identified. So that was the first thing. So you kind of begin to learn your skills. And then it's about, I guess, getting work.
Yeah.
And that is, as anyone can tell you, it's hard. It's a real lot of knocking on doors. Lots of knocking on doors. Interestingly enough, one of my first directing gigs was at Talawa Theatre Company.
Oh.
So, yeah, I went to Yvonne Brewster back then. I'd heard that the company was looking for a director for a play they had coming up. I said, Yvonne, I'm directing now. She'd only known me as, she'd known me as an actor. And I told her and she said no. so Yvonne did not give me a job. But I came back again when they had something else. Eventually I got in at Talawa. I also knew a producer who was working in radio and was just moving over to telly.
Yeah.
And she kind of said, would you like to come and do a bit of TV work? So I managed quite luckily to get into to a bit of television. But it was difficult.
Yeah.
And I think back then, in terms of my own awareness of, right, this is the industry I'm in and these are the forces that are around me, I think I was more like, I'm just keeping going.
Yeah.
I just kept going with
eyes
that.
ahead.
I just kept eyes ahead all the time. I think now there's a much more of a, wow, let's all talk about the inequality that's happening in this industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing that calls everybody to account. I think it's a really positive, constructive movement in understanding and recognizing what this industry is.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like, to an extent, your maybe not lack of awareness, but lack of energy and attention that you paid to the fact that there was this huge inequality, do you think that might have benefited you in, or not hindered you in the same way it would have had you been kind of starkly aware of this kind of massive disadvantage that you were at just by being a black man in this industry?
Possibly. I mean, I was aware of it. My drive was, I really, more than anything else, I wanted to learn my craft.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn the craft of directing. And I think I took all kinds of opportunities wherever they came so that I could practice and learn the craft of directing. And I think back then, that's where I focused all my energy. Yes, I was aware. I was like, how come I didn't get that job? Or why didn't I? Or do you think I didn't get that job because, do you think? But then I just power through to the next thing and like, what's the next gig I'm going to get? Yeah. And
so you said earlier that you started off as an actor and then moved into directing. You realized that directing was more for you. What was the trigger for you to realize that acting's cool, but directing's really where I want to put my time and energy?
I was in a company called The Posse. The Posse was made up of 8 actors who got really fed up with playing drug dealers on TV who had no other function than to just be this kind of catalyst for the stories. They weren't great characters. So we formed a company to do work that we wanted to do. We used comedy and sketch base and music to tell kind of snippets of information about the industry as we saw it. We talked about casting. We talked about Shakespeare, who gets to do what kind of work within our company. We did about 4 shows. We did very well. So one day I'm doing a Posse show. It's called Armed and Dangerous. There's an actor called Victor Romero Evans, a brilliant actor. Really, I mean, they were all great actors in that company, I must admit. Victor, very charismatic actor, gets on stage, stands center, does his stuff. And I remember being on stage one night with him and looking at Vic and going, he is wicked. Wow, Vic is really good. But I think it'd be better if he stood over there. And I think it was at that moment I thought, oh dear, I'm in the
director.
I'm in the wrong place. I can't be as good as Victor is if I'm thinking he should be. Victor's thinking about the scene he's in.
Yeah.
And I think that was a real moment. I kind of thought, I think I should be on this side.
Yeah.
And I think once that happened,
that's where everything fell into place.
Yeah.
Wow. And what was working in black theatre like back then? what was it like as an experience? Because it wasn't it didn't get paid as much attention as it does now. It wasn't as much of a deemed a legitimate form of kind of theatre as it is now. Definitely wasn't getting the funding and, the kind of monetary attention that it is now. So like, what was that like?
Actually, back then, or just a little bit before then, there were quite a few black theatre companies.
Amazing.
There were quite a few. It was Temba and Emoja and, Tara. There was quite a few. Their funding died away, but actually there was quite a vibrant scene. There was the BTC, the Black Theatre Co-op, went to become Nitro. So there was quite a good few, black theatre companies. I think we were probably talking about the same things we're talking now. I think because of the shift, because, the generation now are really calling stuff out, there's a difference. And then we didn't have social media to amplify everything, Today, someone does a play in Manchester, about it in London.
Yeah.
You know how well it's done because it's instant on your phone or whatever device you're looking at it on. Then it was not as easy, certainly not as easy to mobilize groups anyway or to get people talking. Yeah. So the social media aspect has really changed the game. But there was quite a few, and yes, they died out. And I guess then, what was it like? Exciting. It was when people made stuff, it was exciting.
Yeah. That sounds like a really fun experience. I've seen so many things about kind of black theatre in the UK kind of back in the day. And it just looks like it was a really organic and collaborative space to be in with just working with a bunch of friends, maybe not always friends, but just a nice environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we were speaking earlier about your West Indian background. How do you feel your background and your upbringing contributed to the journey that you've gone on to walk?
I guess coming from a very oral tradition, we tell stories at home. There's a lot of play, so I think that's definitely in the mix. I'm not sure if my parents ever saw going into theatre as a kind of legitimate career move. To be quite honest, I think it took a long time for them to kind of go, "Oh, okay, I see. That's what he's doing, and he's fine." But yeah, I think culturally, we come from a storytelling, expressive, kind of vibrant community that's got stuff to say and like to say it.
Do you feel like in kind of harvesting or harnessing that oral tradition that we have across the African diaspora, you've been able to use that in your work as a director? Yeah,
I think it almost subconsciously, subliminally is there. All those influences are being called on constantly. I don't think I'm not aware of that. I consciously go, I'm doing this kind of work from this influence from my West Indian heritage or further back from an African heritage. But I'm very aware that it's always there.
Right. And so in your work first of all, tell us a little bit about Talawa Theatre Company, and then I'll ask you a few more questions about your amazing work there.
Talawa Theatre Company set up in 1986 by four women. So Mona Hammond, Yvonne Brewster, Carmen Monroe, and Inigo Espejio.
Amazing.
They realized that it was very difficult for black actors to get lead parts, especially in the classics. Really difficult. So I think someone had alerted Yvonne to the fact that there was some money, government money available. She should apply for it. She thought, I'm going to set up a black theatre company explicitly to do lead parts for black actors. And that was the start of it. And also to tell, stories from our POV. I think the first production was actually Black Jacobins, which is the story of the Haitian Revolution, then followed by the classics of Lear and importance of being earnest, because there's also this thought that black actors couldn't do Shakespeare or couldn't handle the classics or comedy, and it was just like smashed all of that, But then, of course, there are actors who want to, who would love to have a go at playing King Lear or doing Arthur Miller, which Talawa did. And now, as we move on, I think we're moving into a stage where we're more and more telling our own stories, how we want to tell them.
That's incredible. I was really struck by the kind of mix between classical theatre that Talawa puts on, but also African descendant theatre. So you've been artistic director since 2012, right?
Yeah.
So how has that process been for you in terms of bringing your artistic vision to life, and how do you feel that your Blackness has influenced how you tell specifically classical stories, which were obviously white creations and predominantly were brought to life by white actors, white directors, white hands in general? How have you kind of added your own touch to it?
Okay, let's look at All My Sons, Arthur Miller's play, traditionally produced with a white cast. We've done it with a black cast, and it's a community. And our twist on it is like, you think in the 40s, being a black businessman and the pressure that must be in, you know, first of all, you've got all the props from the community, but then there's a lot to live up to. And what happens if there's a lie that's holding all of that up, and how that feels. I mean, at the end, it's got our lead character being taken away by the police. And I remember Don Warrington saying in the rehearsal, oh my God, can you imagine the shame of that as a black man who's perceived to have done so well in the neighborhood, being led away by the police because his business, which is doing brilliantly well, was actually funded, you know, by this, what's the word for it? This kind of lie, this really awful deceit at the heart of it. So I think when you get a black production, there are layers that go on that are just added textually. It's not, there's no change to the script.
Yeah.
If you look at our version of Lear, my approach to King Lear is like, I think black people didn't arrive in England with the Windrush. Black people have been here for centuries. There could have been quite easily been a black king here before we had the mechanisms of racism that we understand to play out today. It was whoever's the strongest, that's the king.
Winner takes all.
Winner takes all. And that's the version I was going with. And to understand it, I mean, it's called King Lear, and in my script had always written like, you know, the Black King of England. And then people say, if there was a Black King of England, what happened to him? And then if you watch our King Lear, this is what happened to him. As dementia kind of starts to kicks in, he starts to make rash decisions, and because he's the king, no one can argue with him. And if you look at the casting, you'll see the bloodline also starts to kind of
fade out.
As the daughters marry, you know, a man who isn't black, you know, and also it's a mixed court, because one of the, you know, I think it's Kent in there, he has a black mistress and a black wife. And so that's also in the mix. And if you look at how it's done, it's not upfront, but that's exactly what it is. So by the time you get to the death of that family, you understand this is quite possibly a route that could have happened to that bloodline. Now that's a way of casting. It's right there. It's in your face. And that's because that's how I look at it from that perspective.
Wow, that's incredible, because I've seen many renditions of classical plays with black leads, but I'm yet to see many that acknowledge, whether it's subtextually or explicitly, the fact that the lead is black. It's generally just, here's a Shakespearean play. The lead is black, but no adaptations have been made whatsoever. No one else in the play is black. There's no acknowledgement of the fact. It's just, he's just black, but we don't talk about it.
Have a look. And the women, and I mean, we did it as well in like the costumes reflect, you know, a heritage that's not from this island.
That's
you know, so it's worth having a look at.
I think it's important, because when it's that thing of inclusivity and diversity. Like, diversity in theatre is obviously increasing, but the inclusivity part is acknowledging those differences and those kind of discrepancies between culture that aren't necessarily evoked in the text, like explicitly, but do need to be acknowledged in, whether it's visually or just kind of subconsciously.
Absolutely.
And it's incredible that you're doing that.
Absolutely.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And so when you first started off as artistic director of Talawa Theatre Company, what was the collaborative process like for you, especially considering that you're bringing these plays to life in a way that's not in line with the tradition of English theatre? What was that process like for you?
I think when I first got to Talawa, it's It's still quite a bit of a struggle, or it was back then, because, you know, just newly coming into post, and some of the plays I wanted to do, venues were not that interested in. You know, they're like, no, not for us. So it took a bit of time. I think it really kicked off maybe about 7 or 8 months, and someone said, why don't you do Moon on a Rainbow Shore? So Moon on a Rainbow Shore by Elwood John, set in Trinidad. It's a brilliant story of just this local community. I'd done it at the National Theatre, and I thought, okay, let's remount it, because Talawa was essentially a touring company,
Right.
And the National Theatre had also at the time said, yeah, we'll be happy to do a co-production. And I think that's suddenly when people became interested in Talawa, you know, coming on board and saying, okay, we'll have your play. There have been other occasions. I remember one of the plays we did earlier on was called God's Property by Arinze Kenny, who's now, you know, Bob Marley and Misty. And so we done one of his first plays, but it was really hard to get people to co-produce.
Really?
People like, and they ummed and they ahed until we did it at Soho, and suddenly everyone's like, oh, we didn't know it was that. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. So it takes a bit of time, you know, reputationally, I guess, and then people kind of go, oh, Talawa, all right, well, what have you got? And even then, it's, you know, it's not always, people might like the play you're suggesting, but it's not quite right for them at the time.
Right.
So there's a lot of negotiation to do.
What do you think the first what was their apprehension like? What do you think the root of their apprehension was at the time for not wanting to collaborate or not wanting to put on these plays?
I think possibly they're like, I don't know if we're going to sell it. I don't know if our audience are going to come and see this black work.
Right.
Basically.
Right. Okay.
You know.
So
I think there's that. I think there's that. I think there's this terrible, we don't know if our audience are going to come and see black work, but they do.
They love it.
They do. Of course they
Eat
do.
it up.
Of course, you know. And it's, having come from the Posse, which was very successful and did really well, you know, on tour, and then getting a job at Talawa to find that actually I thought the landscape had changed, but actually it wasn't where I thought it was, and a lot of work still had to be done with some national, you know, regional companies in understanding how to market shows that we're producing, where to do marketing, how to make their audiences feel welcome in their spaces, because that's another major thing, you know. How do we feel going across these thresholds? Do we feel comfortable? Do we feel welcomed? So all those kind of things also, as well as being looked at now, were also being looked at then.
So how have you gone about kind of maintaining that artistic integrity that you bring to your plays when having to collaborate with other theatre companies or organizations that might not have the same vision of you, or where your visions might be in direct conflict?
I've got to be honest, I think reasonably I've been all right.
Okay,
I
that's
think you know, they're kind of going right with this Michael and Talawa. We know what they're doing, and I think it's been okay. I think it would be difficult if we were really at odds.
Yeah,
I don't think we would have probably got off the ground. So I think on some level, you know, we must have agreed to begin the collaboration. I think everything at some point is going to be a compromise.
Yeah,
you know, so those things are always going to happen, and it's about how you negotiate. But I think as long as one holds onto one's integrity, you know, and keep true to the things that got this collaboration started, it should generally work out in the end.
Okay, compromise.
Compromise in a collaboration is. I know. I met someone who said they never compromise. It's interesting.
I think it's unrealistic sometimes.
Yeah, I think if it's a collaboration,
you're gonna have to compromise at some
somewhere.
point. Yeah,
And sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, you know, not having the you know, 3 hanging things that you want because we can only afford 2. Actually, 2 looks good.
Yeah. Have you found that you've had experiences where you might have been kind of like stuck on this vision of how you wanted things, but you had to compromise, and in the end you found that kind of added perspective really benefited the end product?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've done productions where we've done the model box and it's great, and you've got into production and they said, actually, we can't make that. Like, why? Oh, because we don't have the budget. So the thing you thought you were going to get is going to have to be a version of.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you know, that bit of pressure makes you diamond. So long as it's not completely compromised, as long as it's not like nothing like what you started off with, which would be a different story.
Yeah.
But I think some compromise, I'm not advocating all compromise, but, where it cannot be helped, embrace it and see what it delivers.
Welcome it, yeah. And so you said that when you moved from Posse to Talawa, you were kind of shocked at how little progress had been made in the industry. What were the main obstacles that were facing the industry then? And do you think that they have persisted till today?
I think they're like I said, I think it's this thing about black work not selling and black, audiences not coming to black work. I think that is that. I think there has been a change recently, certainly within the last couple of years, but I think it's kind of gone back and forth.
Yeah.
I think post-pandemic, post-BLM and George Floyd, I think it's been like, oh yeah. And then suddenly it's all now, we're in a kind of economic crisis and buildings are worried about how they heat, and they may be feeling like, oh gosh, we've got to revert to what we know or what we think our audiences will come
What's
to.
going to bring in the money?
I personally think is always the wrong way to go. You've got to, this is the time for change. So change is the only thing that's going to get you out of it.
And have you found that with the kind of apprehension to give the mic to black work and to put it kind of at the forefront, is that coming from a place of black work isn't deemed as proper as kind of as theatre? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think there's a bit of that. And I genuinely think they just don't think that their audiences will like it. Which makes me think, who's making the decision for your audience?
Yeah.
Does that mean you think that?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, unless they're kind of going, no, it's the data reveals. I don't know. But I do think it's not a very strong argument.
Yeah, I think it's quite a weak one, if anything.
It's a very weak one,
And in the experience of acting and directing, so you've done both, what do you think the obstacles that black actors are facing specifically are today? Or were back then when you were acting as well?
Well, back then it was just about not getting the parts.
Yeah.
Not getting parts that were really kind of sophisticated and gave you stuff to do. And I think there's a massive game change now. There is, I think, and our actors that have left here and gone to the States and done amazing work.
They're doing amazing.
So I think all of that has changed.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, I think if someone was offered a part, as the drug dealer, they probably wouldn't be. I hope anyway. Now, you just wouldn't bother with it, or you'd kind of go, why, yes, he's a drug dealer, but there must be more to the character than this. So if you could do all that for us, then we'll consider
it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great to hear. It's true that, I mean, you've done well when you have Black Americans sweating about the influx. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No one could have seen that coming as like a whole other kind of discourse in the Black relational debate.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so with your work as like an artistic director and that side of things, what are the obstacles that you face from a business perspective? Because I suppose when we think about artistic direction, we tend to focus on the creative side of it, but it's an all encapsulating role, and there's a lot of kind of limbs to what you do. So can you talk us through a bit like what your responsibilities are and the obstacles that come with those as well? Yeah.
I think, well, first and foremost is the kind of creative direction of the company and the kind of work it's making, the kind of artists it's working with, where that work is going, who can we work with. One of the major things that's come up recently is whether the people we're working with do their values and, working ethos align with ours, because that's very important for us now going forward. I think there's also the business side of it. As a publicly funded organization, we have to be very sure of the money we're spending, where we're spending it. It has to be accounted for. We also, specifically as a charity, are constantly looking, out for other streams of revenue.
Right.
Fundraising is a major topic issue for us as a theatre company, and where to go to find those additional streams of income, as it were. So those are the things that we're constantly, well, from my seat as the artistic director, looking at. There's also an executive director who also holds a lot of the business side of the company. So one of those would be the main things, I think.
And have you found that in this cost of living crisis where people's wallets are much tighter, and so spending on things like going to see the theatre and those luxuries that we didn't once consider luxuries. Have you found that that's affected the company at all, or just your role generally?
I think it's definitely affected the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
Because people kind of work out where they're going to spend their money, especially as theatre seems to be so expensive. It's something that we're really aware of, and we're approaching our productions with ticket prices and accessibility in mind, very much on about getting our community in to see our work. So it's something we're very acutely aware of, and are working to make sure that we have a pricing system that allows access to the work and doesn't exclude, because that's another thing. You kind of go, how much is it to go and see that show? Well, that's an instant barrier.
Yeah,
and part of our company's remit is to kind of take down some of these barriers, financial barriers into the industry, stuff like, how do I get into being a writer, actor, director, lighting, sound design, costume design, set design? What are the routes in, And I think hopefully at Talawa, we are trying to illuminate, as it were, some of the pathways into those industries.
Amazing. So in terms of those pathways into the industries, are there workshops, or what are the kind of mechanisms that you've put in place for people who are looking to get into that stuff? Yeah.
So at Talawa, we've got a kind of a pipeline scenario. So for instance, from a writing point of view, we've got a free script reading service. So you can send your script into Talawa when the window's open. It gets read by readers, reports written. Wow. If one of our readers goes, actually, we should take a closer look at this, it gets a second read. And then it gets passed up to our new work producers who start thinking about, well, how can we help this? We have a new writers festival called Talawa First.
Wow.
Talawa First effectively is a showcase of new work that people are invited to come along and look. So venues come along, the Royal Court or Soho or Stratford or anyone.
Amazing.
And to view some of this work. Sometimes this work gets picked up, and then co-productions are possible. So that could be from the writer's POV. Directors, we bring in new directors or newish directors to do the readings, direct the readings. If those pieces go on, those directors go on with the piece. Of course, acting-wise, there's a lot of work for actors who are in these Talawa First scenarios. We've also got our productions. So for this year, we're doing Recognition. So Recognition's about to happen, opens on 5th of June, which is the story of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, who's a classical composer, born and bred, I was going to say in Croydon. Actually, he was born in Holborn, but he grew up in Croydon. And that's his story, and the story of a young woman called Song who's studied music at a conservatoire, and how she feels being in this very white space until she discovers Coleridge-Taylor, his journey. So there's actors getting work that way, directors, Rachel, who's directing, I think this might be her first, her by herself directing gig.
Wow.
Cassie Kano, she's doing the music. I mean, it's a
amazing.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for lots of creatives. So there's that as well. Then we have Tipped, which is the young people's program, which is over 4 weeks where you make a new piece of work, 10 new theatre makers, a couple of new writers, relatively new director, make a piece of work over a month. We have a writers group, which meets on a Wednesday every other week and start doing stuff. And I think the writers group is presenting this year at Talawa First. Really? So there's a lot of kind of ways into the company.
It sounds like Talawa Theatre Company is very open and kind of doesn't have its walls very high, which I think is important, especially when we're looking at Black actors and just Black theatre heads' entry into the industry. It's always been really kind of convoluted and difficult, and there's always been barriers, and slowly those barriers are falling down. But why do you think it's important that Talawa and theatre companies like it are so accessible to the public?
Well, I think it's important that this industry is demystified. I think it's important, if you want your audience or your community to engage with you, you are seen to be open, and there are ways in. I think it's very important, because otherwise it does become a mystery. Right. I think theatre has a reputation of being not for me, or only for those kind of people, not for us. you know, and I think it's the mission of companies like Talawa to kind of go, it's for all of us.
Yeah.
And there's great fun to be had, and we can tell great stories. And theatre is a fantastic medium. It's a really immediate, visceral, you know, medium to work in and to witness.
And in your experience, so you've done theatre, you've acted, you've directed plays, and you've also directed television. You've directed episodes of EastEnders, which I know people will love, Holby City, so on and so forth. What was first of all, how did you kind of make that lateral move into TV, television directing? And what were the differences that you experienced going into that medium versus theatre?
I was working with a producer who did radio, and they were moving into EastEnders, literally, and they said, would you like to
want to direct EastEnders?
Yeah. Which was bizarre because I'd written so many times to the BBC and, you know, not gone to various film, you know, directing courses, and then suddenly she just kind of went, do you want to come in?
Wow. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Which was bizarre considering the you know, the countless letters and stuff.
Yeah.
So I that's how I started working in there, and it was great fun, and it's good, you know. But then I think being at Talawa just gives me more autonomy.
Yeah.
And also one of the great things, which I hadn't quite prepared for when I got the job at Talawa as the artistic director, was being able to enable so many more artists.
Right.
I think that was the thing when you suddenly think, oh my gosh, so we could do Talawa first and give these writers this platform and give those directors the gig to direct the readings, and then we got tipped. And so all of that is,
it's kind of an ecosystem that you're building, isn't it?
Completely.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so in your experience in television, did you find that a lot of the same obstacles and barriers that existed in the theatre industry translated into screen and television?
Back then, I would say so. Yeah. There weren't a lot of black directors around then. I think there's more now. I think like I said, the industry is definitely changing. And if it's not happening there, if directors are, you know, they're going to the States and doing stuff.
Yeah. And they can now.
And they can.
Why do you think it is that Black British actors are so well received in the UK? Because we speak about it all the time, and a lot of people say that they go to the UK because they're not getting their flowers here. Which
to the US, do you mean?
Yeah, to the US. That they're not getting their flowers here, or that, you know, the UK, the industry just doesn't have the money that the US industry does have. But why do you think that they've been received so warmly over there?
I don't know, this might be a terrible thing to say and upset a lot of Americans. I think it's probably to do with the training that you get over here as an actor. I think, especially if you've come from a theatre background, I think the training is like incredible. I think that preparation gives you a bucket load of skills that are so useful and transferable for television. You know, I think about David Harewood, you know, and I watch David on screen, I'm like, that's a theatre background training.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them do go through theatre before they start into TV, whereas I feel like in the States, sometimes they just start straight on screen, isn't it? Okay, yeah. I don't think they'd like hearing that, but that was what I thought as well.
I don't think that's going to go down very well.
I just wanted confirmation from an artistic director, because that was my thought as well.
Yeah.
So looking back, kind of focusing back on the UK industry, what changes would you like to see in the years coming, specifically for Black actors, Black people who are behind the scenes in the creative process, people who are in the higher, kind of at your level and higher up in the theatre industry? What changes do you think need to come?
Yeah, I think definitely more behind the scenes, more Black producers, definitely. You know, in theatre and in television and film, more Black producers to get those stories, get the, you know, the finances and the backing for these stories to be told. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to more Black work in town in the West End. You know, I'm really that's another big kind of barrier I think that has to be kind of pushed through. Definitely, so that we can get our work on in that marketplace as well, of our own volition. I think that's the main ones. And also, just like I said earlier on, you know, Black artists working in sound, in LX, in set design, and that's all transferable, on stage and on screen.
Yeah,
which is something I'd like to see much more of, which is great. And of course, Black leadership in the higher kind of levels of theatre, more EDs, and chairs of boards. That kind of essentially look after and run these theatre spaces.
Right. And how, I suppose, from a practical point of view, like you've outlined the steps of how people can get into those, but what do you think the barriers keeping them from there being more Black producers and more Black EDs, more Black APs? What are the obstacles on a more social level at the moment?
It could be knowing where to find these access points. It could be a big one. It's about, I guess, I'm not sure. But it's finding the inroads. It's knowing who to talk to.
Yeah.
Finding those access points. I think those are the main things. And our networks, expanding our networks, and understanding how they work.
So what is then I think when we talk about networking, it seems like really scary and like this, it just seems really scary to a lot of people. At the end of the day, it's kind of just having conversations with people who do things you're interested in. But what do you think the importance of networking is, especially for younger Black people starting off in this industry?
I think networks are a kind of vital part of work, the work environment. You're going to need to talk to people who can talk to people. And it's not necessarily a scary thing. It can be quite social, And I think because a lot of it can be also about relationships, rather than thinking about them as, oh my God, this scary thing called networking. It could just be relationships. And they're very good for connecting people, which I find quite interesting in this age of Facebook and Insta and Twitter, that kind of lots of people are connected. So there's ways of reaching people, or if you need to get an intro into someone, who do you know who can intro you to someone rather than just cold calling. Might be, these are all, just the ways of getting relationships going. Right.
And do you feel like you've maintained like the relationships that you formed at the beginning of your career? Have you maintained a few of them throughout your career? Have they served you throughout your career?
I think so. I think I've hopefully managed to maintain all those relationships. Maybe not on a daily basis, but
that's asking for a lot.
But definitely on a professional level. There are loads of people I feel very confident and happy to pick up the phone to, or ask questions or favors or information. Definitely. And I guess that comes with being around for a while and also helping other people. Yeah. Because that's the other thing. It's also being able to say, oh, you need that? I think I might be able to put you in contact with so-and-so, or have you spoken to so-and-so? Let me do an email intro. So that's also, yes. So the answer to your question is yes. I think I have.
Hopefully, we'll let the listeners or the people listening.
Who haven't
get a message like I haven't heard for you in 3 years.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to networking, I read something recently that was saying that people focus too much on networking vertically when they should be networking laterally and kind of looking to their sides and seeing who they're coming up with and who's kind of trying to go into the same industry as them. And it sounds like in your background, that's kind of where your networking was, and that you were in Posse and you were among equals. You were all kind of doing the same thing at the same level. And I imagine you've kind of gone off to do different things, but you've been able to maintain those relationships. So do you think that that's where people should focus more of their energy?
I think absolutely. Yeah. I love the idea of doing it laterally. That makes absolute sense. I watch kind of a new generation now, and I watch them all rising and say, you are your own network. Yeah. And before you know it, you're the people, everyone else is going, oh, I want to be like them, which is what's happening all around. I look at some of the people now running buildings or, and I'm like, oh my God, they were my assistant not too long ago. And now they're doing this. So, or they were my assistant on a particular production. Yeah. And now they're,
amazing.
So all of that is great. And yes, laterally, absolutely. And the thing about networking, one of the things that someone told me, it might be some kind of social event, is like not to try and seal the deal. It's not about, oh, you got to get something out of this
interaction.
No.
Yeah.
It's a much more
just
gradual.
Knowing someone, yeah.
It's about the relationship.
And kind of prioritizing relationships. In your experience, so you've been named one of the most influential directors of classical plays over the 2 decades, and one of Creative Review's 50 creative leaders. So you've reached great heights, especially considering your background and kind of your non-classical route, I suppose. How have those accolades and affirmations impacted the way that you view your work and the way that you think incoming generations will be able to thrive in this industry?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure how I view those accolades in terms of how I do my work. I do kind of just get up and every production is just like, it's right, it's a new one.
Yeah.
I think it would be quite hard to kind of go, well, here I am, about to do this new production. I am the most, one of the most influential. It just wouldn't work. So I kind of, that's lovely.
Yeah.
But I kind of leave that to one side.
The show goes on.
Definitely the show goes on. And how is it viewed by others? What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, so what do you think it means for incoming generations of people who are trying to reach the heights that you've reached?
Well, I think what it will probably do is, or hopefully do, is what happened when I saw that youth theatre shows that you kind of go, oh my God, he looks and sounds like me. I can do that. I can do that. I can see how, oh, that's his pathway. So it's possible that I can do that. So I'm hoping that would be the legacy or what's kind of gained from any kind of accolades that I've garnered, is that it points, it's a path for others to follow, or definitely look at, even if they decide, actually, that's his path, but I might go a slightly different way, but we know it's possible. Incredible.
And obviously having received those accolades implies like a level of recognition that you're getting from the wider industry, which is an incredible kind of feat as a Black man in this white-dominated industry. Do you feel, though, that there is a place for Blackness in theatre, or is that place still being fought for today?
I think it's there.
Yeah.
I think it's ours. I don't. I just have it. I just like,
it's mine.
It's mine. I'm here. I'm doing this play. This is it. It's Black. It's us, and we're doing it. Watch. I mean, that's it for me. I think I focus my energy that way around.
Yeah. And I guess that's what works as well.
Yeah, for me, it certainly does. Yeah. Yeah.
Incredible. And so speaking more on a practical level, for people who quite literally want to be sitting where you're sitting right now in 20 years or 30 years, however long, what practical steps would you give to someone who's starting off right now at the very beginning of their career, or maybe hasn't even realized that they want to be a director? Maybe they're still an actor.
Right. Well, I'd say go where your heart leads you. Be passionate about it. Be passionate about your craft. That's the real thing, I think. For me, that's managed to hold on through any kind of bumpy roads. It's really about being passionate about how to do this job, and be true to your heart.
Yeah.
That's another one. It's listen to that and be guided by that, and it's going to be hard. That's a given. I think it's going to be hard at some points, but it's also going to be great.
Yeah.
At some points, and it's just being able to sit with both of those things. If you go where your artistic impulses is leading you.
Yeah. Have you ever had instances where you felt like what made the most sense to do and what your heart was telling you to do in your career was conflicting? And how did you deal with those kinds of situations?
Yeah, that's why I said go with your heart. I remember one scenario where I thought, I really wanted to do this thing, but I said I was going to do that, and I just did what I said I was going to do.
Yeah.
Rather, I should have done what my heart wanted me to do.
And it would have paid off more if you had just done what your heart
I don't know
wanted
if it would have paid off more necessarily, but at least I would have done what my heart said.
Yeah.
And I think it's harder to argue, if I decided to go left, but my heart said go left, and it all went to it all died.
Yeah.
At least I did what my heart said. Well, I kind of went the other way.
You
My
weren't
heart wasn't
even-
really in
yeah.
it. And it was just kind of okay.
So it's like, why did you even do it?
You know? Yeah.
And so for yourself specifically, looking back to where you were reading through those newspapers that your dad was bringing home from work, what advice would you give to a younger self, a younger Michael, knowing that you're kind of going on the path that you're going now?
I would say to the younger Michael, everything works out in the end.
Oh.
Everything works out in the end. And like I just said, I would say go with your heart. Go with your heart. And thirdly, I'd say enjoy it all, the good and the bad. Have a laugh, have fun with it, all of it.
Yeah.
Because they're both, going to be there. It's going to be good and it's going to be bad. Laugh all the way through.
And have you done that? Have you laughed all the way through?
I have.
We love to see it.
I have. I might not have been laughing when it was bad, but I have definitely. I can look back now and go, yeah, enjoy all of it. I'm certainly, I think, now learning to enjoy all of it.
Incredible.
Both parts of the life.
Yeah. How do you go about when you're in the thick of it? I think sometimes it can be hard to have that perspective and think this is something that I'm going to look back on and really wish that I had been more present or more kind of just gone more with the flow. So how do you kind of ground yourself in those moments where, especially in stressful times?
That I think takes a lot of practice. It's really, it's one that I've learned over the years. But it's interesting, like even now, it's just learning to get a bit of distance or find the gap, as it were. I'm getting really philosophical about it, in between whatever the stress is and whatever your reaction is. And in that bit there, if you can find the time in there to breathe,
Center yourself.
then
That
response then changes rather than responding definitely to whatever happened, which leads to something else. It's finding the space in between.
Don't be reactive, kind of be reflective first.
If you can find the space.
I think that's really good advice. Actually, I might take that home for myself. What you just said made me think of something. So when we're working kind of specifically in the creative industry, I think that the rules of corporate 9-to-5s or just 9-to-5s generally don't really apply when you're doing a job that is so intertwined with your passion and your calling and what you feel is your purpose on this earth. So how do you go about kind of navigating a work-life balance when your work and your life, like the boundaries between those two are kind of blurred?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one, especially if your work is your passion. Yeah. It's a tough one. But I think as I go on, it's another one. I'm desperately trying to navigate a bit better because I think at the beginning I was probably all out work. I probably was like,
workaholic.
I would keep going. Weekends still working or, at parties making, networking. I think now it's slightly different. I think a work-life balance is important. But I don't want to lose the passion for the work. Yeah. But also, it's got to be for something. And if you've got a life that you're going to go, this is great, but ultimately I think this is the most important thing. One's life outside that. Then has to be taken care of.
So taking time away when you need to. Basically.
Absolutely. Especially now, I think, especially because we're all, we've got phones, we're constantly contactable, on
it's changed
WhatsApp,
things.
Slack, email, text. I mean, it's relentless. Yeah. So I think even more so nowadays, we have to, find a way, to have a balance because that it is harder to sustain.
Yeah. It requires a lot more intentionality, doesn't it, nowadays? Yeah. When your boss can contact you on your phone while you're in bed.
Absolutely. And I think even at Talawa, we're putting in kind of things that give you some kind of boundaries. Don't email before 9 a.m. Don't email after 6. Yeah. Or weekends are usually sacrosanct unless we've got something on. And,
amazing.
We're looking at well-being and in the office and don't stay at your desk and have lunch and go out and walk. So there's lots of things that we're also realizing that this is important working in our industry. As much as we're passionate, we do also have to look after ourselves to be able to deliver the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think especially working as a company that's dealing in such a humane medium, it's important that the way you interact with your employees is, human, right?
Yes.
Which a lot of workplaces don't get right. So it's great that you guys are doing it.
Yeah.
What, looking back on your career and looking into the future with your third eye, what have the highlights been so far for you, and what are you looking forward to in your years to come?
Highlights. In terms of, professionally, there's some been great highlights. I've done some really fantastic shows that I've been so happy and proud of, and just, watching the audience's reaction as you kind of go, wow, look at them. We've cast this magic spell, making the audience believe that everything they're watching is happening right now. It's amazing. We've done some, I think about Moon and Rainbow Shawl and Raisin, brilliant, and even Guys and Dolls and Leah and Running with Lions most recently, and a place where we all gorgeous stuff. I'm really looking forward to recognition. This is really, I'm just hearing bits of music as I walk past the rehearsal room. I'm thinking, wow, I can't wait to see how that's received. We've got a big show we're doing next year with some a musical with some a Duke Ellington score.
Wow!
So I'm really looking forward to seeing what that's going to be like. Yeah.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
What's the plot of the musical? Can you reveal?
Yeah.
Give us
It's 12th night. It's 12th night, basically.
Okay.
Set in Harlem in the 40s.
Amazing.
Yeah.
With the Duke Ellington score.
Duke Ellington score.
I'll be front row at that one.
And then I think we're allowed to say that. Oh my God, I hope we are allowed to say that. I'm hoping I've broken some protocol. I can't
because
remember.
this is pre-recorded. If you're not, you can.
I'll let you know tomorrow.
We'll bleep out this whole.
Okay, cool.
Just 30 seconds of blink noise.
Okay.
And in your personal life, what have the highlights been, considering that I think work and life are very much one and the same, if you do it right, they coexist, right?
Yeah.
What have the highlights been for you so far?
Well, I think for me, kind of highlight's going to be my children, my two children.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. And just watching them grow and become, young people in the world. And also all this, the kind of fresh perspectives they bring into us every day. So, I think that's the highlights in a personal life. And watching them grow and go off into the world.
Oh, amazing. It's incredible that you've been able to achieve the heights that you have, both creatively and kind of in your career, but also be able to maintain a really strong family unit, it sounds. So congratulations.
I've been very lucky though. My partner is doing a lot of this work as well. So it's not all me being totally amazing.
Shout out to them.
Shout out to my partner. She's there doing a lot of that heavy lifting as well. So.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that your story, I know it's resonated with me personally. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. What you've been able to achieve throughout your career has been nothing short of remarkable. So I hope that you pay yourself the homage and the flowers that you absolutely are deserving of. It's been a fantastic conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the How Did I Get Here podcast. Our episodes are released on the third Wednesday of each month, so make sure to tune in, and don't forget to follow us at BCA Heritage on all social media platforms for information on what we have on. If you liked our introduction and want to learn more, come visit our archives. Our reading room is open Wednesday to Friday and the first Saturday of every month. Check out the bottom of our website for the opening times and pay us a visit here in Brixton. And remember, culture is resilient. Diversity is resilient. Keep going and don't stop until you get there.